The Wife He Built, a psychological thriller. There are two kinds of detectives. The first kind looks at a crime scene and sees evidence. Fiber, blood, trajectory, time of death. Facts arranged in space. A puzzle to be solved with logic and patience. The second kind looks at a crime scene and sees a person. Not the victim, not the killer, but the relationship between them, the history, the love, the slow-burning resentment, the final moment when something that started as devotion became something else entirely. Detective Nora Voss was the second kind, which is why when she walked into the Calloway house on the morning of November 3rd and saw Richard Calloway sitting at his kitchen table with his wife's blood on his hands, literally on his hands, drying in the creases of his knuckles, her first thought was not, he did it. Her first thought was, he loved her. Her second thought, which came approximately 4 seconds later and would keep her awake for the next 11 nights, was, that doesn't mean he didn't. Part 1. The scene. The call came in at 6:14 a.m. Nora was already awake. She was always already awake at 6:14 a.m., had been for 6 years. Ever since a case in Chicago that she did not think about before noon if she could help it. She was on her second coffee, standing at her kitchen window watching the November light come up gray and thin over the New Haven rooftops, when her phone rang. Calloway residence, said her partner, Detective Ray Suarez, on the other end. Westville neighborhood, uniform is on scene. You are going to want to come yourself. Talk to me. Female victim, 34, Claire Calloway, Nundy Hartwell. Blunt force, looks like found by the husband in their bedroom at approximately 6 a.m. A pause. He says he woke up and she was already dead. Nora set down her coffee. He says, yeah. And where is he now? Kitchen table. Won't move. Keeps asking if she is okay. Another pause, heavier this time. Nora, she is very not okay. She was in the car in 4 minutes. The Calloway house was a wide Victorian on Ellsworth Avenue. The kind of house that had been carefully restored, lovingly so, with new paint that matched the original colors and a porch that had been rebuilt to exact historical specification. Someone in that house cared about things being right, about things being the way they were supposed to be. Nora noted that. She ducked under the yellow tape and nodded to the uniform at the door. Patrolman Diaz, young, slightly green around the edges in a way that told her the scene inside was bad. She suited up in the entryway and walked through. The house was beautiful. That was the first thing. Warm hardwood floors, art on the walls, real art, not prints. A kitchen that had clearly been renovated with care and a dining room that still had the original crown molding, photographs everywhere. A couple, over and over, in different configurations. Mountains, beaches, a city that looked like Prague. A wedding photo on the hallway wall. The woman laughing. The man looking at her with an expression that Nora had a word for. Devoted. She went upstairs. She would not describe what she saw in the bedroom. Not in clinical terms, not in any terms. She had seen violent death before, and she would see it again. And it never got easier, which she believed was correct. It should never get easier. She stood in the doorway for 10 seconds and took in what she needed to take in, and then she went back downstairs. Ray was in the kitchen. Richard Calloway was at the table. He was 40 years old, medium build, dark hair with gray at the temples. He was wearing a t-shirt and pajama pants, and his hands were resting on the table in front of him, palms up, in a posture that looked almost supplicating. His face was the face of someone who had passed through shock and come out somewhere quieter and more terrible on the other side. His hands, the blood in the creases. Nora sat down across from him. Mr. Calloway, she said. I am Detective Voss. I am very sorry for your loss. He looked at her. His eyes were dark brown, red-rimmed. He started. I need to ask you some questions, Nora said gently. I know this is an incredibly difficult moment, but the first hours matter, and I need your help. She kept her voice steady, low. Can you tell me what happened this morning? Richard Calloway looked at his hands. I woke up, he said. 6 o'clock. Maybe a little before. Claire wasn't in bed. He paused. She is an early riser. I thought she was downstairs. Another pause. She wasn't downstairs. I went back up and I looked in the bathroom and she wasn't there. And then I opened the... He stopped. Swallowed. The guest room door was open. We use it as a study. She goes in there sometimes when she can't sleep. She was on the floor. His voice was entirely flat, hollowed out. I went to her. I tried to. I don't know what I tried to do. He looked at his hands again. I called 911. Nora watched him. She was running assessments the way she always did. Not mechanically, but intuitively, the way a musician hears wrong notes. Grief. Yes, real grief, she thought. The kind that sits in the body, not the kind that performs itself for an audience. But grief and guilt were not mutually exclusive. What time did you go to sleep last night? She asked. 11, maybe 11:30, and Claire. Same, we went to bed together. He looked up. We always go to bed together, 15 years of marriage, we always. He stopped. Something crossed his face that Nora couldn't immediately name. Almost always, he amended quietly. She noted that. Is there anyone who would want to harm your wife? Nora asked. Richard Calloway's eyes went somewhere distant. No, he said then. I don't know. Then, after a long silence that Nora did not fill, there is someone she used to know. Part 2. The someone, his name was Daniel Verne. Richard said it the way people say names they have rehearsed not reacting to, with careful, deliberate neutrality that reveals exactly how much the name cost them. Daniel Verne had been Claire's boyfriend before Richard. College sweethearts, Richard explained, looking at the table. They'd been together 3 years. It ended badly. Claire had ended it. She'd met Richard at a law firm dinner 6 months before graduation, and that had been that. How badly? Nora asked. He didn't take it well. Richard's jaw tightened. He called her a lot. For about a year after. She changed her number twice. He paused. This was 15 years ago. And recently, a longer pause. He contacted her again, about 2 months ago, email. He looked up. She told me about it. She showed you the email. She read it to me. Nora noted the distinction. What did it say? That he was in New Haven, that he'd thought about her a lot over the years, that he hoped she was well. Richard's voice was careful. It sounded like someone who had worked through something and wanted closure. That is what Claire said. And what did you say? Richard was quiet. I said I didn't like it. Did Claire respond to the email? The pause before this answer was the longest one yet. I don't know, he said. Nora looked at him steadily. Mr. Calloway, did Claire respond to the email? I don't know, he said again. But something in the way he said it, the slight emphasis, the controlled exhale, told Nora that the honest answer was I suspect she did, and I chose not to find out for certain. She moved on. Ray had been standing near the door, taking notes. He caught Nora's eye and gave a small nod toward the hallway. He'd found something. She excused herself. In the hallway, Ray held up an evidence bag inside. A cell phone, cracked screen. Found it under the radiator in the study? He said quietly. Not Claire's phone. We've got hers in the bedroom. This is a second phone. Nora looked at it, a cheap prepaid. The kind people bought when they didn't want a record. Whose? She said. Working on it. Ray glanced toward the kitchen. Also, forensics says time of death is somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m. Richard says he slept through till 6. He paused. That is a 4-hour window in a house where he is the only other person. Any sign of forced entry? None. Nora looked at the wedding photograph on the wall. The man watching the woman laugh. Pull everything on Daniel Verne, she said. Current address, employment, alibi for last night. She looked back at the kitchen. And get me Claire's email account. Part 3. Claire. Claire Hartwell Calloway, the evidence showed, was a woman of considerable interior life. Her email account, accessed with a warrant by mid-afternoon, told the story in layers. On the surface, a senior editor at a mid-sized publishing house, organized and professional, with a full inbox and a methodical filing system. Underneath, a woman who wrote long, careful emails to a small number of people, who thought in complete sentences, who was funny and private in a way that her formal correspondence never suggested. And underneath that, 43 emails to and from an address registered to D. Verne, starting 8 weeks ago. Nora read them all. They started the way Richard had described, careful, searching, the language of two people testing ice. I've thought about you. I hope life has been good to you. I remember the year we spent in that terrible apartment on Birch Street, and I still laugh about the radiator, nostalgic warm. Nothing incriminating. Then they shifted. Not into anything explicit. Claire was too careful for that, or too conflicted, or both. But the warmth deepened. The frequency increased. By week 4, they were emailing daily. By week 6, twice a day. And the content, still nothing you could point to as evidence of an affair, but something more intimate than nostalgia. Confessional. The kind of honesty people reach for when they've been performing a version of themselves for a long time and they need to put it down somewhere. I don't know how to explain it to you, Claire wrote in week 6. I love Richard. I want you to know that first, but loving someone and being known by someone are not always the same thing, and I used to feel known. Nora read that sentence 3 times. She thought about Richard at the kitchen table, the wedding photograph, the carefully restored house. A man who cared about things being right, about things being the way they were supposed to be. She thought about the difference between loving someone and knowing them. She requested Daniel Verne's phone records. Part 4. Daniel. Daniel Verne was not what Nora expected. She had built a picture of him from fragments. The obsessive calls 15 years ago. The reappearance. The secret emails. And the picture was of someone unstable. Fixated. The kind of man who couldn't let go. The man who opened the door of his Westville apartment, 4 blocks from the Calloway house, which was not a coincidence Nora intended to overlook, was quiet. 41. Slight, with the careful stillness of someone who had done a lot of work on himself. A therapist's office, she thought, or a meditation practice, or both. She showed him her badge. He let her in without being asked. The apartment was orderly and sparse. Books, a desk, very little decoration. A man who traveled light, emotionally as well as physically. You know why I am here, Nora said. Yes, Daniel said. He sat in the chair across from her. Claire, when did you find out? This morning I saw it on the news. He was quiet. I've been sitting here since then. Tell me about last night. He met her eyes steadily. I was here, alone. I ordered food at 8. You can check the delivery record. I was in bed by 10:30. A pause. I know how this looks. How does it look? Like I had motive. He said it plainly. An old relationship reconnected, living 4 blocks away. The husband probably told you about the emails. He folded his hands. I loved Claire. I loved her 15 years ago, and when she reached out to me 2 months ago, yes, I felt that again. I won't pretend I didn't. Were you having an affair? He said it without hesitation. We met once for coffee 3 weeks ago, 1 hour. That was the only time I saw her in person. He paused. She was trying to figure something out. I don't think she knew what she wanted. I told her I would wait, and I meant it, and that is the last conversation I had with her. Nora watched him. You told her you'd wait. Yes. Did she tell her husband she met you for coffee? Daniel was quiet for a moment. I don't know what she told him. Nora looked around the apartment, sparse, orderly. A man who had learned to hold things lightly, or who was very good at appearing to. Mr. Verne, she said. Do you know of anyone who would want to harm Claire? He looked at her. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, she thought. Something more complicated. Yes, he said. Part 5. The thing Richard didn't say what Daniel told her sent Nora back to the Calloway house that evening. Richard was still there. The family liaison had stayed with him, and he'd changed clothes and showered, and he looked fractionally more present than he had in the morning, but no less devastated. He let her in. He made tea she didn't want, and he didn't drink. She sat across from him again. I want to talk about Claire's work, she said. Something shifted in his face, subtle, controlled. Her work, he said. She was a senior editor, publishing house on Chapel Street. She'd been there 9 years. Nora paused. About a year ago, she flagged a financial irregularity in the company's royalty accounts, brought it to the CEO. The CEO investigated, found nothing, and the matter was dropped. She kept her eyes on Richard. Claire didn't agree that there was nothing there. Richard looked at his tea. She continued looking into it on her own, Nora said. She kept records, emails, spreadsheets, copies of statements. She compiled what amounts to a fairly detailed accusation of systematic fraud. Nora paused. Did you know about this? A very long silence. She mentioned it, Richard said carefully. I told her to let it go. Why? Because the CEO had investigated and found nothing, because Claire was not an accountant. Because, he stopped. Because I was worried about her job. And were you worried about anything else? Richard looked up. His eyes were careful, closed in a way they hadn't been this morning. What are you asking me, he said. The CEO of Meridian Press, Nora said, is a man named Gerald Price, 62 years old. Well, connected in New Haven's business community, she paused. He is also a client of your firm. Richard Calloway was a partner at a mid-size commercial litigation firm. Nora had pulled his professional history in the afternoon. Gerald Price had been a client of the firm for 11 years. Richard's client specifically for the last 4. That is correct, Richard said. Did you tell Gerald Price that your wife was continuing to investigate him? The silence this time was different from all the previous ones. It had a different texture, harder, more deliberate. No, Richard said. Nora looked at him. The devoted man from the wedding photograph. The man who cared about things being right, about things being the way they were supposed to be. She thought about a word, complicit. Mr. Calloway, she said, I am going to need you to come down to the station tomorrow morning with a lawyer. Part 6, 3 a.m. Nora did not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with the case file and the photographs and the 43 emails printed and arranged in order, and she built the thing that she built on every case. Not a timeline, not a theory, but a portrait. A picture of the relationships involved and what had moved through them over time. The way a river moves through a landscape, carving channels that look inevitable only in retrospect. Claire Hartwell Calloway, sharp, organized, funny in private. A woman who had noticed something wrong at her workplace and could not look away from it. A woman who had, after 15 years of a good marriage to a devoted man, reached back towards something. A person, a feeling, a version of herself she used to be. Not because the marriage was bad, because she was lonely inside it in a way she couldn't name. Richard Calloway. The devoted man. The man who built things carefully. The house, the marriage, the career. Who had a dangerous client and a wife who was dangerous to that client and who had perhaps said something he could not take back. Or perhaps had not said anything. Perhaps had simply known and said nothing, and let it happen. There was a difference between those two things legally, morally. Nora was less certain. Daniel Verne, the man Claire had reached toward, who had told Nora something important this afternoon, that Claire had confided in him about the investigation, that she'd been scared. That 3 days ago she'd sent him a message saying, I think Richard knows I am still looking into it, and I don't know what he'll do. The message had a timestamp of 11:47 p.m., 2 nights before her death. The prepaid phone. Nora had the records now. The phone had been purchased 6 weeks ago. It had made and received calls to a single number. That number belonged to Gerald Price. Not Richard's phone, Gerald Price's phone. She stared at that for a long time. Then she thought about the creak of a door in a sleeping house. The study with its radiator and its unlocked window that faced a side alley. The time of death window 2 to 4 a.m., and a sleeping husband who heard nothing. She thought about how a man like Gerald Price solved problems. She called Ray at 3:17 a.m. "Pull Price's financials," she said, "and I want to know if he has any employees with a criminal record. Specifically, anything involving violence." "It is 3 in the morning," Ray said. "I know." A pause. She heard him sit up in bed. "You think it is Price?" "I think Richard told Price something he shouldn't have. I think Price acted on it. I think Richard has spent today trying to figure out if he caused his wife's death or just failed to prevent it." She paused. "And I think that distinction is going to matter to him a great deal more than it matters to the law." Ray was quiet. Then, "And Daniel Verne." "Red herring," she said it without satisfaction. "Perfectly placed." Claire's old boyfriend reappears, moves 4 blocks away, exchanges emails. It is a clean misdirection. Either Price knew about it and used it, or it is a coincidence that worked in his favor. She paused. "I don't believe in coincidences." "You think Price had someone follow her?" "I think Claire Calloway was a careful woman who used a secret email account and met her old boyfriend in a coffee shop 3 blocks from her office. And somehow Gerald Price found out about the investigation she'd given up officially and was still running privately." She looked at the emails. "I think Richard knows I am still looking into it. Someone told him, either Richard or someone who was watching her. Or both," Ray said. "Or both." She hung up and sat in the dark for another hour, then she got in her car. Part 7. What the house knew. She went back to the Calloway house. Not inside. The scene was still active. The family liaison had moved Richard to a hotel. She stood on the sidewalk in the dark and looked at the side of the house. The alley. The window on the second floor that faced it. The study window, the one they'd noted, was unlocked. A good climber could do it. Not easy, but possible. The fence line, the drain pipe, the window ledge. She walked the alley with her flashlight. There, a partial boot print in the mud near the fence. Larger than average. Fresh, the rain had come day before yesterday, so the mud was only 48 hours old. She photographed it. There, a scrape on the drain pipe at approximately 8 feet, the galvanized surface scratched through to metal. Recent, she photographed that too. She stood in the alley and looked up at the window, and she thought about Claire Calloway on the floor of that room, the coffee meeting 3 weeks ago, the emails, the investigation that a good woman couldn't put down because she had seen something wrong and could not look away from it. She thought about Richard at the kitchen table, the blood in the creases of his hands. "I don't know what he'll do." He hadn't done anything. That was the tragedy of it. He'd mentioned his wife's persistence to a client he was afraid of losing, in a conversation he probably told himself was just venting, just expressing frustration, just the ordinary marital complaint of a man whose wife wouldn't listen to him. And Gerald Price had listened very carefully to what was said between the lines. And then Richard had come home and gone to bed at 11:30 and slept the sleep of a man who had convinced himself that nothing would happen, that Price wasn't that kind of man, that it would all settle down. And in the hours he slept, it had not settled down. Nora stood in the alley for a long time. Then she called Ray again. "I found the entry point," she said. "Get forensics back here at first light, and I want Price brought in for questioning by 9 a.m. She paused. "Also locate whoever Richard Calloway called in the 48 hours before his wife died. Every call. I want the list before I talk to him tomorrow." "You still want to talk to him?" "Yes. Even if Price is the one who, he didn't pull a trigger," Nora said. He didn't climb a drain pipe, but he said something to someone he should not have said about a woman who trusted him, and she is dead. She looked up at the window. I want to look him in the eye when he figures out what he did. Part 8. The Interrogation. Gerald Price was the kind of man who walked into a police interrogation room like he was arriving at a board meeting. 62, silver-haired, the comfortable authority of someone who had never seriously been questioned in his life. He brought a lawyer, of course. Nora sat across from him and let him settle. Let the lawyer make his opening statement about cooperation and Mr. Price's full willingness to assist. Let the silence do some work. Then she put a photograph on the table, the prepaid phone. "Do you recognize this?" she said. "No," Price said. "It was found at the scene of Claire Calloway's murder. It contains call records to and from your personal cell number." She let that sit. "Would you like to revise your answer?" The lawyer leaned in. Price held up a hand. "I'd like to understand what you are suggesting," Price said. "I am not suggesting anything," Nora said pleasantly. "I am telling you that a phone found at a murder scene has your number in it. I'd like you to explain that to me." Price looked at the photograph for a long time. "Claire Calloway had made some accusations about our company," he said finally. "Unfounded accusations. I was kept informed of the situation." "By whom?" A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "By my internal team." "Richard Calloway is not your internal team," Nora said. "He is your attorney, and he mentioned his wife's private investigation to you in a conversation 3 weeks ago." She watched Price's face, after which you had her follow. "I did nothing of the man you hired," Nora said, "has a record. 2 counts of aggravated assault, 1 plea, bargained down from something worse. He currently works for a security consulting firm that your company has retained for the past 14 months. She slid another paper across the table. His boot size is 12. The print in the alley outside the Calloway house is a 12. Price's lawyer put a hand on his arm. Price looked at Nora, and Nora saw it. Not guilt. Exactly. Something more intricate and more awful. The face of a man who had ordered something and had not thought through what he was ordering, or had thought it through and decided not to examine it too closely. A man who had said take care of it to someone who took care of it. "I want to speak with my lawyer," Price said. "Of course." Nora gathered her papers. She stood. At the door, she turned back. "Mr. Price, Claire Calloway was right, by the way, about the accounts. We've had 2 forensic accountants go through what she compiled." She paused. She was meticulous. She left him sitting there. Part 9. Richard. She found Richard Calloway at the hotel that evening. He opened the door when she knocked. He looked like a man who had aged 5 years in 12 hours. The lawyer was there, a criminal defense attorney, which told Nora he'd spent the day understanding his situation. "Detective Voss," he said. "May I come in?" He let her in. The lawyer stayed in the corner. Richard sat on the edge of the bed. "We've arrested Gerald Price," Nora said, "and the man he hired." She paused. "I want you to understand what happened, and then I want you to tell me your version of it on the record, with your attorney present, because how you tell it will matter." Richard looked at his hands. They were clean now, but she thought he'd be looking at them for a long time. "I told Gerald," he said. "I know you know that." "What did you tell him?" "That Claire was still investigating, that she had documents, that she wasn't going to stop." His voice was very quiet. "I told him because I was afraid. The firm's relationship with Meridian Press is worth $800,000 a year, and I was afraid she was going to destroy it." He looked up. "That is a terrible thing to say out loud." "Yes," Nora said. "I didn't think." He stopped. "I told myself he would just talk to her, that he would find a way to make it go away quietly." "I didn't think you didn't want to think," Nora said. "Not cruelly, just precisely." He flinched. "Number I didn't want to think." The room was quiet. She was reaching out to Daniel Verne, Richard said after a moment. I knew about it. The emails. I found the account about a month ago. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was nothing. He paused. But I think I was angry, and I think that anger was underneath everything when I talked to Gerald. I think I wanted. He stopped again. You wanted to be the one who was right, Nora said quietly. And you wanted her to be the one who was wrong. Richard Calloway closed his eyes. She wasn't wrong, he said, about any of it. The accounts, the fraud, all of it. His voice broke slightly, the first time it had broken all day. She was never wrong. She just saw things I didn't want to see. Nora sat with that for a moment. Tell me everything, she said, from the beginning. Leave nothing out, he told her. It took 2 hours. His lawyer intervened 3 times. Nora let the recording run. When he finished, she stood. The DA will decide what charges look appropriate, she said. That is not my call. But your cooperation tonight will matter. She moved toward the door. Then she stopped. The photograph in your hallway, your wedding, the way you are looking at her. She turned back. That was real. Richard Calloway looked at her. It was always real, he said. That is what I have to live with. Nora nodded once. Then she left. Part 10, Nora. She drove home through the November dark. New Haven's streets were wet and quiet, the streetlights making orange halos in the mist. She thought about Claire Calloway, who had seen something wrong and could not look away, who had loved her husband and been lonely inside that love, who had reached back towards something that felt like being known and had written her truth into 43 emails to a man who had waited 15 years for her. She thought about Daniel Verne sitting in his spare apartment on the day that Claire died, who would carry something now that had no name and no resolution. She thought about Richard, who had built a beautiful house and a devoted life and had dismantled it in one conversation with a client he was afraid of losing. She thought about Gerald Price, who had solved a problem the way powerful men sometimes solve problems, by naming it to someone else and looking away. She thought about the woman in the wedding photograph who laughed without knowing she was being watched. She parked outside her apartment. She sat in the car for a while. She was the second kind of detective. The kind who saw the relationship between the people, not just the facts and the space between them. It was useful. It let her see things others missed. But it also meant that every case left a residue, the shape of lives that had intersected badly, had cut each other, had failed each other in ways that were both ordinary and catastrophic. Loving someone and being known by someone are not always the same thing. She'd been reading those words all day. She thought about the last person who had known her. 6 years ago, before Chicago. Before she'd learned to be the second kind of detective, or before she'd let herself become it fully, which was perhaps the same thing. She got out of the car. She went inside. She put the case file on the table and she did not open it again that night. Tomorrow there would be more. There was always more. The Dade's office, the arraignment, the careful architecture of the case, brick by brick. She would build it well. She would do it for Claire Calloway, who had been meticulous, who had been right, who had seen something wrong and could not look away from it. She would do it because that was the job, and because the job on its best days was also a form of love. Not the love in the wedding photograph, something more stripped down, the decision to keep looking at something painful and to not turn away from it. She sat at her window the way she'd sat that morning, watching the city go dark. She thought, I need to sleep. She thought, tomorrow. She thought about Claire Calloway's last email to Daniel Verne, which she had read 11 times throughout the day, and which she had not included in any report, because it was not evidence of anything except a human heart. I don't know what I am doing. I don't know what I want. I just know that when I talk to you, I feel like myself. And I had forgotten what that felt like. Nora Voss sat at her window and watched the November dark and felt, for just a moment, the weight of all the lives that moved through the world alongside hers, invisible, real, full of longing. Then she got up. She made tea. She went to bed. Gerald Price was convicted 19 months later. Second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud. He received 32 years. He would be 94 if he served the full sentence. The man he hired, a former security contractor named Cole Briggs, received life without parole. The house on Ellsworth Avenue still stands. New paint, same bones. New people eating dinner at a table in the same spot where Richard Calloway once sat with blood drying in the creases of his hands. Claire Calloway saw something wrong and could not look away from it. That was her nature. That was also, in the end, what killed her. Not the seeing, but the fact that she trusted the wrong person with what she saw. She was right about everything, the accounts, the fraud, the danger. She was meticulous and she was brave and she was lonely inside a love that had stopped knowing her. Gerald Price said, "Take care of it," and looked away. Richard said too much and told himself it was nothing, and Claire paid for both their silences. Nora Voss will tell you there is no clean ending to a case like this, no moment where justice arrives and the weight lifts. There is only the work, the daily decision to keep looking at something painful and not turn away from it. That, she would say, is the only kind of love that never fails anyone. Keep turning toward each other before someone stops turning back.